and we made it to the final video in my catch-up wrap-up series. If you haven't seen, for the last 4 days, I've been talking about all of the books that I read in the last 3 months. That ended up being 41 books. And I've already talked about my SFF books, my romance books, my contemporary, and my nonfiction books. So today's video is going to be going over all of the rereads that I did for some of my favorite books from childhood. I went home for 2 weeks and I completely dove into my old collection of books and picked out a bunch that I wanted to reread. Unsurprisingly, I didn't finish all of the ones that I was planning to reread, so I actually took some back with me. They're just chilling up there. I will be reading those soon, but that is for a later date. Today we're going to talk about all of the books I did reread, starting with Wayside School is Falling Down by Louis Sachar. I think this is technically the second book in the series, and I do own the first one. I just have no idea where it is in that house, and I found this one and I wanted to reread it, so I did. I remember absolutely loving this series as a kid. I had my parents read it to me so many times. It was so much fun. It's a bunch of short stories about this really odd school, and specifically this classroom that's on the 30th floor with some very interesting students and interesting teachers. It's so crazy and wacky and fun. There are evil teachers and disappearing students and mystery lunch meat, and it's so funny. I still really enjoyed my read through of it now, also partially because I remember a lot of the stuff from when I was a kid, and it was really interesting seeing it through adult eyes now. It still holds up. It's still really funny, and I really love it. If you have children, these are some really fun books to get them to read, and it definitely made me want to read more as a kid. Next, I reread Beastly by Alex Flinn, and I remember absolutely loving this book. That's going to be a theme throughout this video. I should probably just stop saying that I love them because you already know. That's the whole point. So, moving on, Beastly is a Beauty and the Beast retelling in contemporary New York and from the perspective of the Beast. It follows the pretentious popular boy in school as he's cursed to turn into the Beast, and basic Beauty and the Beast stuff from there. It doesn't really deviate that much from it other than the setting being in contemporary New York, which was very interesting. I think the strength of this book is definitely the characters. I remember when I first read it that I was so surprised how I could go from completely hating a character in the beginning to absolutely loving them by the end. I think that's what made this book really stand out for me when I was young. And looking back on it now, it is actually pretty well done. It's not quite to the extent that I remember it being, but that's to be expected. But it was still really good. The author does a good job of really making you hate the character in the beginning. They are just so stuck up and annoying, and eventually they start to learn from their mistakes and grow and become a better person, and it's really fun to watch. There's a really great cast of characters here. All of these side characters are very entertaining and very unique. The way that they all interact and the actual love and care you can feel between them all is so nice to see. I will say there is some slightly ableist theming with one of the side characters, and there was some fatphobic language in the beginning. And the Belle character didn't really feel fully fleshed out. She felt very flat and like she didn't really have much of a personality, which was a little bit weird considering the Beauty and the Beast story is mainly told from this really powerful Belle perspective, and since we're flipping it around in this story, I would still think that Belle should be a stronger character than she was in this. She kind of just felt like she was being tugged along for the ride, except for the one instance where we needed a conflict for the plot, so that was slightly disappointing. But otherwise, it's a pretty fun retelling, and it's definitely very interesting. I think it was one of the first books I'd read where there was some references to forums and chat groups online. There was the slightest bit of technology on the earliest days, and it was really interesting to see looking back now, but I think it was really modern for the time when I read it, so that was also really funny. So even though I don't have quite the amount of love for it that I did before, I still think it's a good book. Next, I read Something Maybe by Elizabeth Scott, and this is a contemporary romance that I literally could remember nothing about, and was very surprised when I ended up reading it and seeing what it's about. There is a lot more mature theming than I thought I was exposed to back then, or than I should have been exposed to back then. This follows Hannah as she tries to grab the attention of her crush in school while also coming to terms with her very complicated home life. Her parents are separated and her mother is a cam girl while her father basically owns the Playboy Mansion and has a very popular I don't know if it's a web show or a TV show, and he hasn't really had contact with Hannah for 5 years when he suddenly says he misses her, and it just so happens that his show ratings are currently low. While it's not actually explicit, there is a lot more sexual theming in this than I remembered. I didn't remember anything actually, so than I expected. But I think the family dynamics that are shown in this are actually really important and really unique because it's not something that's normally shown in fiction that I've seen. It is a very dysfunctional family, and sometimes her parents don't really care for what is actually good for her or care for her at all, and things don't always work out exactly how you want them to, and I think it's really important for that to be portrayed in fiction. But the other half of this story with the whole romance love thing was just, I loved it. There's a sort of love triangle. It's not really a triangle, it's like a love line. It only goes one direction, but it's just, that whole situation was so cute and so ideal. Oh my god, I really enjoyed it. The character who wins that situation is just the cutest, sweetest boy ever. Oh my god, I love him so much. Again, it does a really good job of subverting expectations, and I think it was so well done. I just really enjoyed their scenes together and the chemistry that they have. It was adorable and just so sweet, and I loved it. I really, really did. I love him so much. This book was just really fascinating with the way that it tackles all of these different topics while still being a pretty lighthearted contemporary that was a lot of fun to read. I actually just really enjoyed reading this again. It's not quite what I remembered, but I still love that guy so very much. And I think that's what made me love this book too, is just, that guy is so good. Next, I read one of my favorite middle grade series, which was The Doll People and the Meanest Doll in the World by, excuse me while I read this, Anne M. Martin, Laura Godwin, and Brian Selznick. This is basically about dolls that are alive, and that was absolutely fascinating to me as a child. This first book follows a family of dolls, and the aunt of the family has been missing for about 50 years, and the little doll girl wants to go on a mission to explore the human house in order to find her missing aunt. Reading this first book again, it's still so good. It's such a good story. It's an action-adventure mystery. There are a lot of characters and a lot of different viewpoints that get introduced as you meet new characters that they haven't had any interaction with for like 100 years. And this dangerous mission of exploring the human house while avoiding the cat and avoiding being seen by the humans is just so exciting and also so believable. The way that the lives of these dolls is explained is just something so fun to think about and something that you could actually really see happening. And it's completely immersive. There are drawings throughout this book, and I think it's perfect for young readers. It definitely kept me entertained when I was young. I loved thinking about all of these dolls just running around the house, and it's like Toy Story. It's basically the same concept, and it's so much fun. Why is it that children's toys coming to life at night is just something that is so fascinating to kids? It's lovely. The second book in the duology, The Meanest Doll in the World, is not quite on the level of The Doll People in my opinion. I think it was a little bit slower paced and not quite as well written as the first one. It was definitely full of a bunch of morals that you could tell the authors were trying to teach little kids, so it was a little bit more clunky in that respect, which sort of brings you out of the story, as well as the story just not being quite as fast-paced and entertaining as the first one is. In this one, the dolls are accidentally taken to school and they get mixed up and end up in someone else's home where they encounter the meanest doll in the world. I think another part of my issue with it is actually just me being really dumb on a child's book. The villain character didn't really have much of a motivation, but it's a children's book. What do I need from it? I don't need that. Children don't need that. It's just a villain character, and while their actions don't always make sense, it's an antagonist for the story, and that's sometimes necessary. So really, my points are stupid, but that combined with the sort of clunky moral writing just made it not quite as good as the first book, in my opinion. It's still fun. You get to meet a bunch of new characters and see how dolls that are alive in other houses kind of interact with each other, so that was an interesting expansion of the world, but I still think The Doll People is the better book. Next, I reread The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton. This was actually read to me in 5th grade by my teacher, and I remember absolutely loving it enough that I made my parents go buy me a copy for myself. This follows a boy who is just bored with everything in life. He has nothing to do, and all of a sudden, he he gets sent this really odd Tollbooth, where when he goes through it, he ends up in a magical world. He goes on an adventure in this other world to rescue the princesses, which is very classic and typical, but the uniqueness of the story comes from this world itself, which is based kind of on turns of phrase and puns and just scholarly things. It's a very intellectual book, and because of that, I got a little bit tired reading it every so often. It's just him going through this world and encountering one thing and dealing with it and talking to these people who are kind of weird, and then moving on and doing the next thing. Trying to piece through all of the sort of hidden messages and hidden meanings in these encounters back to back kind of gets tiring and boring, but it was still really fun. There's a world of numbers versus the world of words and which one's better. And he encounters an orchestra that brings all of the colors into the world. It's responsible for calling the dawn and the dusk, and he gets into a predicament where he kind of makes 7 days pass in 2 minutes. So while a lot of it is really silly on the surface, there's always this little deeper nugget of truth or a trick that you need to figure out to get, I think, the full enjoyment from it. And because it's just constantly one after another of trying to figure out all of these little things that are underneath the surface, it got a little bit tiring. But that being said, if you just read it in a longer time span, take more breaks rather than binging through it in a day like I did, then it wouldn't really be a problem, and it's just entertaining the whole way through. It's a really wacky world that you can just enjoy on the surface, but then there's also another layer of enjoyment when you start thinking about it more. So it was a lot of fun when I was a kid. It's still a lot of fun now. It is written a tad bit dry, but I still really enjoyed it, and I think it's a good book. It's a pretty old book too. I didn't realize. I think it was written in like the 40s or the 50s, which I didn't know, but it's interesting and I would recommend it. And finally, we come to my favorite series as a kid. That was the Gallagher Girls series by Ali Carter. I still have never finished the series, and I really want to. There are 6 books. I only owned 4, and I'd only read 4, so I reread those 4. I still need to get the other 2 from my library, but the books that I reread were I'd Tell You I Love You, but then I'd have to kill you, Cross My Heart and Hope to Spy, Don't Judge a Girl by Her Cover, and Only the Good Spy Young. As you can maybe tell from these titles, this is about a spy school, and I freaking loved it. It was basically my Harry Potter. I did also love Harry Potter as a kid, but my main school setting that I wanted to go to was the Gallagher Academy. Something about just young girl spies was perfect. It was perfect. I loved it so much. The first book follows Cammy, who is a young spy in training, and she ends up catching the eye of a regular boy. Now, because she is a spy, her whole school and everything is hidden and no one is allowed to know about it. So she goes on these undercover missions to go have dates with this regular boy because she misses regular life. She doesn't get a chance to experience that. And it's their sort of love story, but it's also her becoming a spy, and it's so good. The series definitely evolves from there. It goes completely in a different direction. I wonder if actually the first book was supposed to be a standalone, and when it was successful, the author just kept writing more, because it feels like the books after this are more in a very specific plot line than the first book was. But then again, there are some things in the first book that kind of tie into everything, so maybe it was just a hook to get people in. I don't know. But the first book is kind of disparate from the rest of the books in terms of plot. There are evil spy groups working to take down the Gallagher Academy, as well as in particular trying to get Cammy. Very much a la Voldemort in Harry Potter, but I cannot tell you how much I absolutely loved these books, and rereading them was so much fun. I definitely noticed a lot more issues in it this time around, but I love this world so much. One of my favorite things that I actually remembered pretty well was that this school teaches these girls 14 languages, and at meal times they have a specific language that they need everyone to talk in order to practice, and I thought that was so cool. That might be why I'm so obsessed with learning languages now. I just kind of realized that. I don't know, but it's so fascinating, the fact that they can talk in all of these different languages. I thought it was so cool. In addition to learning all of these spy things and the way that this school can like transform itself if there are visitors, it's just all so cool. I did notice this time around that the writing is kind of childish, and this character actually starts to fall into some of the tropes that I really, really cannot stand now. She is very braggy and very confident, But at the same time, I think what makes me not hate her, as I do with some other characters, such as Mags from the Sixth World series and the main character in The Last Magician and the main character in Seven Blades in Black, who are all very, very cocky. In this one, Cammy is also quite self-deprecating, so I think it brings it back a little bit. But also, I just have nostalgia for this series, so there's that. It is written in an older YA style as well, with the same kind of tone and writing techniques that were really popular back then. And while I know that the characters aren't that well developed, they have very distinctive personalities that they just kind of fit into this little bubble. I still love them with my whole heart. It's mainly a plot-focused story anyway. The plots are very interesting. There tends to be a mystery element involved just because Cammy and her friends are so young, so they're kept in the dark on a lot of things. And I really just love that school setting in the first couple books. The later books tend to get a little bit darker as you go more into the actual plot of the story. They become much more serious and not quite as focused on boys as the first two were, and I did start to notice a bit more plot holes that weren't fully explained. I will be continuing the series and seeing where the story finally ends because I need to know after all of this time. I still really love this series. It's not perfect. I can see more of its flaws now on this reread, but it still just holds such a special place in my heart. I wanted to be a spy at the school so badly, and I don't think anything's ever really gonna take that from me. But that's it for all of my childhood rereads. There are definitely books that I still have at home that I want to get back to and reread. I just didn't have time on this last trip. Maybe in the future I will finally be able to reread everything because all of the books that I have at home are ones that I wanted to keep for one reason or another, and I've forgotten most of them by now. So I want to go back and see what I loved about each book and whether they still hold up. And even if they can't be dethroned, I'm still interested in what they would look like to me now. But that's it for my catch-up wrap-up series. If you've been with me for the past 4 days, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully I'll be able to keep up with my wrap-ups more regularly now so that I don't have 41 books to review in such a short time. I think that would be better for both of us. But if you haven't seen those videos yet, I will link them, of course, and hopefully you don't get too sick of me talking. But that's it for now, and I will see you later. Bye. We've made it to the final... Whoa, my voice. I guess I need to talk a bit more before immediately filming first thing in the morning. That were childhood favorites. Fly! Oh my god. Go away! Why do you want my tea? The books that I reread is not a word. I think someone's doing like jumping jacks upstairs.